Afternoon, everyone. You're in the zone with Pete Coles and Rich Sutter, the best 1-2 punch in the hoop business right now. So we're in the middle of it, Pete, in the middle of the holidays. November 30th today. We're about ready to enter December. I think we got some December weather already a little bit floating around here. But still pretty nice out there today. Today's the 30th, though. We're ready to head into December, and people around here know what that means. It's going to be a little bit of time before we see the sun again. So lots of time to watch hoops, lots of time to get in and really ensconce in the basketball season. Wanted to just start off with our Feed 'em Fish segment today, and we're going to jump right off with a couple of tidbits here. Not a whole lot going on the Feed 'em Fish front, but we're going to jump right in. Today we're going to offer up our Fabulous 15 in the NBA, and we're going to also put together our own top 25. I've been looking at a lot of the top 25s that are out there, and the top of the list resonates with me to a good deal. The bottom of the list doesn't really resonate with me a whole lot. So I wanted to put together my own list, look at really exploring who's played who's digested the most cannolis, who's had the most cupcakes, and then try and extrapolate that, put it into formula, and see if we could come up with something that we thought was, deserving of people that might be in, that you're not going to see in an average top 25, the AP or the coaches poll or anything like that. Very standard. And some of these teams absolutely have to lose almost every single game to be knocked out of the top 25. I'll give you an example of that when we go through it. But I did want to start off the show today with a little Shark Tank action.
Shark Tank?
Shark Tank. Mark Cuban has decided to sell a significant portion of the Dallas Mavericks. And the reason I say Shark Tank is because the number that he bought the Mavericks at was somewhere around the $200 million mark, a little bit higher than that, I believe. But right now, his portion of what he's selling right now is going for over $2 billion. And so you can see why Mr. Cuban is the entrepreneur that he is and the successful businessman that he is. He's taken that franchise, and they've won a championship during his tenure. But the funny thing about it is, Pete, is that he's getting to step away from where he's selling the business, but he gets to keep a lot of the retainment of how to actually run the business himself. So he's still going to be involved in it very heavily, but he seems to have sold most of his rights to the team, to another group, and it was in north of $2 billion. So the rich keep getting richer. But I thought that, it was worth mentioning because it's not every day you see an NBA franchise get sold. And then to understand the magnitude and the level of some of these franchises and what they've actually become worth.
Can you imagine how much appreciation of value that is, though? Look at the Crafts, the same thing on the football side or in the baseball side. The appreciation is 1,000-fold. I mean, you didn't buy it that long ago, right?
When I first started out, there was a group of people that I knew that were interested in buying the New York Mets. And at that time, it was in the middle 80s, and the number, and they thought probably the number might not have been right for them, but the number at the time was $19 million.
Holy cow.
For the New York Mets in the mid-80s. Right now, that would be one of the greatest bargains in the history of the world because the New York Mets franchise, albeit inept, and heartbreaking franchise that they are worth significantly a lot more than that right now.
Right, because if you look at the price of gas at that time, it was around $1. So if you figure you've tripled that, that was still only $60 million. It's probably worth what? Close to $1 billion?
Oh, it has to be over that.
Yeah.
It has to be
amazing.
north of that. Yeah,
amazing.
So that's pretty wild. But then I wanted to jump into the college game here because I thought that this was a pretty good accomplishment that I wanted to raise. Fran Dunphy is the head coach at LaSalle now, and he's been around the Power 5 schools in Philadelphia his whole life. I ran into Coach Dunphy when I was an assistant coach at Colgate, and we wound up playing his Pennsylvania team when he was in the Ivy Leagues at Madison Square Garden. So it's one of the great accomplishments of my life to be playing in Madison Square Garden, coaching a team in Madison Square Garden, which was really, really exciting for me to sit on a bench in Madison Square Garden. The only bad part about it was Dunphy's team was unbelievable. They were top 25, and I think we lost somewhere in the range of 25 to 30 points in that L. But it was still fun to sit in the Garden, but also, as I've talked about a little bit before in the show, when you scout against somebody, you really get to see the inner brain of their basketball coach. You really get to see what goes on inside that gentleman's head, what motivates him, what he thinks is important in basketball, and the things that he doesn't feel are important. In the time that I prepared scouting reports for a lot of Division I teams, going back a number of years now, I would say that Fran Dunphy's understanding of pick and roll at that time was absolutely amazing. And the reason, he just picked up his 600th victory, career-wise. And that's what I wanted to congratulate him on. Such a great accomplishment. I myself crossed the threshold of 300, so I can understand what that means. To double that number, something I'll never do. 600 is significant, and that puts him into a very, very elite group. Okay, so he went from Pennsylvania and coached there for many, many years. And probably to this day would say he probably never should have left. And when he was at Penn, he had great success with great young men, Jerome Allen and Maloney, and some great players that they got to go to Penn at the time. And if you look back through the Ivy Leagues at the last 40 years, the Penn teams that he coached would be considered some of the greatest teams in league history. Pete Carrill obviously had some great teams there. The Princeton teams are very strong right now, and we've included them in our top 25. But his teams, Coach Dunphy's teams, are always well coached, always execute well. And when he went from Temple, he went to Temple, and they had some problems there for whatever reason. He wound up getting let go at Temple as the head coach there. And to this day, Temple does not have a coach that can hold Fran Dunphy's clipboard. And so the reason I say that is sometimes even really good coaches go through highs and lows. Temple's movement of league from their former league, back in the day they were in something called the Empire 8 when I was at St. Bonaventure. But they moved leagues and went into this conference that took them all the way across the country competing against teams that it was the same league that UConn was in. And it just really, really impacted them in a way that really, really was significant, because Temple's always been about Philadelphia. Temple's always been about the East Coast. And to move that program, all of your sports, everything, out to a group of people out by Texas and playing like that, it really, LaSalle is one of the teams that they don't really notably talk about, but that's one of the teams that really suffered from some of this conference realignment. Somebody thought it was a good idea for LaSalle, for Temple, and on those Philadelphia schools that are ingrained in that Big Five, Palestra, Villanova, that whole thing. It was just an odd move to go all the way across the country to do that. And I think it impacted their program greatly. And while they had a really, really good coach, they wound up letting him go because it's hard to let all the players go. You let the coach go.
Sure.
You can't let all 15 players go. Same thing happens in the NBA. You let the coach go, and you hope for the better. Well, Temple hasn't seen any near the heights that Coach Dunphy had them at, certainly not back to the Chaney era when Temple was really, really top 25 and one of the most respected programs in the entire country. I think that sometimes these athletic directors get caught up in this wheel of the carousel. Everything starts to turn, and they forget what they have and what your program really is. And at that moment, they had the best guy that they could possibly have leading that program, Philadelphia guy, strong basketball coach, and it wasn't good enough because they weren't willing to go through some of the tough times that they themselves initiated by moving their team out of that conference. So coach 600 at 3 different schools, it's amazing. It's a fantastic accomplishment. I guarantee you that at least half of those were at Penn, and the teams he had there were unbelievable, and a very, very solid coach. And so we're going to move on. From that, Coach Dunphy, congrats, 600 is amazing. This was something that was brought up to me at the lunch table. So around our lunch table at Westfield State, we love to talk basketball. We love to talk sports in general. Patriots, the Red Sox, any sports are welcome. We love to fill up the table with sports. But I was put on notice from the lunch table committee that I need to get on the air on Thursday and absolutely destroy this NBA in-season tournament.
Really?
That's what they said. That's what they said. Okay? And so I looked at it, all right? And I gave them a grade F, the NBA, because there's 3 Fs in there. 1, your fans. They're confused. They don't even know what's going on. One of the points that was raised at the lunch table, which is an excellent point, is one of the things that's going on now is these point differentials in order to decide some of these matches. So if you scored more points than the other team, you wind up getting the differentials in points. So you see the Celtics blowing somebody out the other night by 28 points and have all of their starters still out on the floor because they're looking at the point differential of this crazy in-season tournament.
Fans, here's the fans' response.
They're like shaking their head and they're scratching their head at the same time. But that's one of the grade Fs is your fans. The second grade F is your floor. If you watch the floor of those games, they repainted them. They did something to the floor, the actual wood floor, put paint on it. It absolutely looked horrible. All right, watching the game and watching that floor go up and down, I thought I was getting self-induced vertigo there for a little while.
Is that the one where I saw like the whole 3-point arc was a different color?
Everything was different. They had blues. They had all this different stuff. It looked like it was very, very advanced. It looked like a spaceship almost. But again, you lost me here with this thing. So we got 3 Fs in this thing: your fans, your floor, and it's far too soon to be starting this thing in the middle of the season right now when they haven't even played 20 games yet.
Right.
The league total hasn't amassed 20 games yet, and then you throw this silly corporate thing into the middle of the season and say they're going to love it.
Can I do it? Can I do it?
Do it again, Pete. Do it again, because it's all about the money. It's all about that. And what I watched a lot of the games, so I enjoyed the games and stuff like that. But I still can't tell you who's leading, who's winning, and who's got what. And they have a point differential in there. So if they won by 28, but then they only won by 24, now they have a +4 on the point differential. That's going to carry them over the top. That's insane. That's ludicrous.
When a sports friend has to do algebra, it's a problem.
It's a bunch of corporate guys that the only thing they ever dribbled was the milk down their shirt. And so that it's one of the problems that we have. It's corporate. It's about return on investment. It's about all those good things which pay the bills. But at the same time, you better keep your eye on your fans. You better keep your eye on their interest in this and make sure that stays steady. So with that being said, we're ready to jump off into our NBA top 15 NBA collection of teams that we think are doing pretty good. And then we have some interesting teams that you won't hear in our top 15. And then we have what we're referring to as the bottom of the barrel. And we're going to talk about 3 or 4 teams that are absolutely at the bottom of the barrel. And we talked about them preseason. We talked about before this thing ever tipped off, said it was going to be a long year. And we were proven to be prophetic on that one. It's going to be a long year in some of these cities. But for right now, and because this has nothing to do with the fact that we're a regional show located in Massachusetts, but in our number 1 and 2 picks for NCAA and for the NBA, I wanted you to know that it's the Boston Celtics and the UConn Huskies, because we're a regional show, and I'm not opposed to selling out if more people watch our show, because you say you love the Huskies and you say you love the Celtics. Got it. I don't know anybody in Texas except my sister. So after that, we're going to keep it as best we can, but we also want it to be straight up and honest with it. But without further ado, number 1 in the NBA top 15 are the hometown Boston Celtics. They are playing at a really, really good clip. They're 14-4 right now. And when we do this top 15, we didn't just pick the East Coast and then the West Coast. We picked all the teams in the NBA right now and we ranked them. And so some are West Coast, some are East Coast. As far as the bifurcation came down, and I was a little bit interested in that, it went 8-7 to the West or 8-7 to the East. I'll figure that out as we go through. It's 8-7 to the East. Okay, so 8 of the teams in this top 15 are from the East Coast, 7 are from the West Coast. And so I was a little surprised at that because there's been a little bit of a theory that the West Coast has been a little dominant in basketball of late, and maybe so. Maybe that's warranted, and you could be right there. But right now, the top of the 5 is heavily tilted towards the East Coast. So a surprise in the number 2 hole are the Minnesota Timberwolves. They have great talent. Anthony Edwards, they're doing some really good stuff out there, and they are really, really innovative with some of the stuff they're running on offense. I really, really like watching the Wolves. I think they're doing great. They're 13-4, and they are exceeding expectations that nobody held for them right now. Now, we're looking at a very small microcosm. We're looking at a very small sample size, but right now, they're in the number 2 spot, and nobody, and I mean nobody, at the beginning of the season would have put them into the number 2 spot. Number 3 and 4, we've got 2 teams with similar records. One is a surprise, one isn't. The Milwaukee Bucks I picked 3rd at 13-5. Dame Lillard has been a very good addition to their team. I was a little worried about some of the chemistry, but right now, look at Antetokounmpo's numbers the last couple of games, and oh my God, he scored 50, he scored 40. He has been absolutely on a tear. Right now, In the Zone has him as our MVP running right now. Hot. He's running very, very hot, and people thought that Lillard might eat some of that away, but it really hasn't turned out that way. So I have the Milwaukee Bucks in the 3 spot at 13-5, playing very, very well and doing some nice stuff. So Orlando Magic with the Timberwolves are if you have a West and an East team that are both very, very surprising. I was high on this team a little bit early on in the year, but they've even surprised and exceeded my expectations. I think Orlando as a franchise right now is doing things similar to the Miami Heat, where they're bringing in what they consider to be the right guys, to be program guys, to be integrity guys who may not have gotten drafted but understand their role in the franchise and understand what they're trying to accomplish. Orlando Magic is operating at a very, very high level right now. They're 13-5 as well with the Bucks. I just picked the Bucks over them because the Bucks have had a little bit of injury and they had a little bit of a schneid, but Orlando, the same thing. They got into a little bit of trouble there, a little bit of bumpy stuff, but they're playing at a very high level. Wagner for the Magic is doing really, really well. They've got some really other good players out there. In the 5 spot, might surprise some people, but it's so hard to repeat. It's really, really difficult to repeat in the pro ranks. It's what makes Tom Brady and Bill Belichick's record with the Patriots. When you sit down and examine that record at the level that they were at, it was unbelievable, the amount of success they had and the way they were able to continue it. Same thing if you go back and look at the Boston Celtics in the Red Auerbach era. I mean, the amount of winning, and we're talking about Will Chamberlain was on the other side. We're talking about some of the greatest players in the game were on the other side at that time, and the Celtics were absolutely dominant during that time. You don't see that often. You don't see that often. What you do see is it's a whole lot easier to fall down than it is to fall up in the NBA. So Celtics, they're grooving right now. They're doing good stuff. They're without Porzingis right now, and that's going to be for a little bit of time. But right now they seem to have been able to use Horford and some of their other players to alleviate that. But right now they're at the top of the dog. Denver Nuggets are 5th, and they're the national champions. They're 13-6. They have 6 losses. The caveat that I'd like to throw into this one is they have not had Jamal Murray. They're one of their best 1 or 2 players for a good part of the season. When Murray comes back, I think the Nuggets are going to start to go back to where they were. But without him right now, they're struggling a little bit. And then lost Bruce Brown, a player who might have stepped into that void when Murray went out. Possibly you could have had that. But right now, they're struggling a little bit till Murray gets back. I think he'll be back soon, but until that happens, Denver's 13-6 and in the 5 spot. Philadelphia 76ers, They're down in the 6 hole. They're doing pretty good in their post-Harden era. Right now, they're 13, 12-6. I mean, have a pretty good record, doing very, very well. They have Joel Embiid, the MVP, Tyrese Maxey playing at a very, very high level, and they've got some good role players over there as well. They have a new coaching staff. Excuse me. With the elimination of Doc Rivers, and they brought in Rick Nurse, new coaching staff, and we'll see how that works. But right now they're holding water and they're doing okay. 6 losses, yeah, that's about right. They're in about a 700% range, and if they could keep that for the year, I think everybody in Philadelphia would buy that. The Dallas Mavericks are back a little bit. The Dallas Mavericks are back. Pete and I probably talked about this team, this unity, this chemistry as much as anybody we've talked about because of Kyrie Irving being added to the team last year and them absolutely dissolving like an Alka-Seltzer in warm water. So we had our reasons. And now to watch them, and we alluded to the fact that Luka Doncic had intimated that they're working on chemistry. And that's something I thought was so profound because it speaks volumes to the whole enterprise of chemistry. It doesn't come overnight. You just can't make it happen. And if you don't have it, the days are longer. If you don't have it in any sport, the days are longer. Okay, so the Mavs are 11-6. They're doing very, very well. Luka playing at a very, very high level, has to be considered for the MVP of the NBA early on right now because he is showing up in so many categories. He is passing, he's shooting, he's rebounding, he's doing everything statistically that you can possibly do as a basketball player, and he's doing it real, real well. Him and the Joker are really, really dominating the game right now at a level that we haven't seen from big men in a while. And these are big men that can shoot. These are big men that can pass. These are big men that can create plays for their teammates. So we're not talking about that old low post center of Shaquille O'Neal and the big guys who just ran over people in the low post. We're talking about somebody now who can step out and be just like everybody else on the perimeter. And what that does is create such spacing. And this is what the Warriors' whole organization and enterprise is built upon, is spacing. Moving away from each other to create requisite room for your teammate to do what he does well. And so that whole concept now is where the NBA has shifted, and it's one of the reasons you're seeing Jokic and Doncic have as good a success as they are, because that's the way the NBA shifted. The NBA set it up for them very, very nicely.
Sure.
So they're in the 7 hole. Oklahoma City Thunder are in the 8th spot, 11-6. Started off a little rough. I have high hopes for this team. And if anybody out there is considering who you think you're going to bet on for Rookie of the Year, I'd give Holmgren a look because Chet Holmgren is playing at a very, very high level right now and is eligible for Rookie of the Year consideration because he did not play last year. And so that red shirt year for him, as I call it, a red shirt year, was very, very impactful on his career. He got stronger, was able to put on muscle, and I think that you're going to see some of that happen more and more and more in the NBA with some of the players that they feel are just not physically up to it. All right? And so it really helped him. And I think the Oklahoma City Thunder have a really good team. They have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They have some other pieces there that are pretty good. And they're getting some good production out of Kessler and some big guys inside. So I think they're not bad. I think they're going to be legit. A little bit low here, I thought. 9 in the Phoenix Suns. I thought they'd be a lot higher. I think everybody thought they would be a lot higher. You had a lot of people, prognosticators on television and the like, talking about having the Phoenix Suns as maybe the best team in the West this year. It's just not, it hasn't materialized. That's not to say that it can't. But again, a little tiny bit of a caveat. They made a blockbuster trade for Bradley Beal during the offseason, and he hasn't been able to, due to injury, really jump into their lineup and be a significant part of their lineup. The move of Booker to the point guard hasn't really produced a ton of result that I would be excited about to say that was the really good move to make. But the old man in the sea, Kevin Durant, has moved up in scoring, probably second in the league in scoring right now, third in the league in scoring, and he's really, really raised his game and just recently had a really, really good bunch of games. What you're going to see with some of the players who've been in the league a long time is they may start a little bit slow because of their age and some of the beating that they take on their body over the course of time. And if you're not one of the highly trained, attuned athletes like a LeBron James, a Michael Jordan, a Kobe Bryant, those guys who worked on their body as hard as they worked on their basketball, that's where you run into problems. And that's where I think, you're looking at Durant and some of the other guys with that crazy, crazy schedule. He's been in the playoffs most of his career, so that adds extra games onto your schedule. But right now, I got to give it to him. I thought he was cooked personally. But right now, he's second or third in the league in scoring, and he's doing some really good stuff. So I like to be corrected. I like to say that I'm wrong. I like to be able to go back on things that we said, because people will prove you right and people will prove you wrong at different times. So my New York Knicks in at the 10 spot, I just haven't been able to love them as a team. I just don't love them. They're very gritty. They do a lot of good stuff on the defensive end, but their offense makes me just almost go to sleep. It's very, very contrived, doesn't have a lot of creativity to it, and it basically just creates one-on-one options for players out on the floor. And when they're doing their one-on-one thing, everybody else is standing around. So I like Thibodeau as a defensive coach. I think they might want to get somebody in there like a D'Antonio, who coached the Phoenix Suns, or somebody there who's known as an offensive expert, because right now their offense is grinding. And maybe that's part of it, because in order to have a good defense, sometimes you got to slow your offense down. Because if you go down and shoot the ball within 5 seconds of the shot clock, the other team gets it back real quick. They didn't have to play defense. They didn't have to exert any energy. And so if you come down and you want to be really good on defense, you better slow the ball down on offense a little bit, because otherwise you're just putting it into the hands of the other team, placing duress on your defense, and it's going to create situations where even the best defenses will break down under those situations. But again, they're my hometown crew. I love them, but I just can't watch them that much. They're just boring me to death. I'm sorry. In 11, they're 10-7. The Knicks, not bad. In the 11 spot, the Sacramento Kings, same record as the Knicks. I think the Kings should have been better than they were. Another caveat is that De'Aaron Fox was out there. One of their best players was out for a very, very significant amount of time during this run. And so you look at it and you say, okay, maybe now they recalibrate and they move. I had higher hopes for the Kings than that, okay? But every single one of these teams is on the playoff line now. So every one of these 15 teams that we're talking about right now is ready to make the playoffs. And so that's an indicator of whether you're doing well or not. There's a line on the standings that goes on ESPN. There's a big, big line under 8 on every one of these teams. So when you get to 8, that's it. You don't make the playoffs. When you get to 10 on the other side, whatever, you don't make the playoffs. And so that line is the line of demarcation. And that's what we're looking at right now. There's some teams that are above the line of demarcation that people didn't expect to be there. And there are some teams below the line of demarcation that people didn't expect to be there. And that's basketball. That's the NBA. Los Angeles Lakers in the 12 spot. Again, I'm going to throw it out. Give LeBron James the ball and get out of the way. You'll be better for it. They're 11-8. They have a winning record. They don't have a very good team. Sorry, Laker fans. Sorry, Forum fans. Sorry, Jack Nicholson. But you don't have a very good team this year. And this is a dog that's not going to hunt in the playoffs, especially in the West. They'll be bounced out. Maybe, depending upon how their injuries hold together, they could be bounced out in the first round. If anything happens to LeBron James, this team's looking at 50 losses. Okay, Indiana Pacers in the 13 hole, 9-7. Tyrese Halliburton has been playing out of his mind and has this team single-handedly poised for the playoffs, in position, and he's just playing at a high level. Right now, he would have to be in consideration for the MVP. He would have to be. Go and look at his numbers. Nobody knows who this guy is. He toils in obscurity a little bit, but let me tell you something. He is putting up numbers, and it's on 2 different areas of the ball. He is scoring the ball, and he is doing an unbelievable job assisting the ball. There's only one player in NBA history that I know of who led the NBA in scoring and assists, and that was Nate Tiny Archibald, way, way back when I was a young man. So we're talking about the 70s or the 80s, the early 80s at the best. So this has not been done in a really, really long time. I don't think Halliburton can do it because he's a little low on the scoring, but he is leading the league in assists right now, and that's one of the reasons that the Indiana Pacers have a shot. A lot can change, and we'll be talking about it all the way through the year, but a lot can change. All right, so the Miami Heat, a little surprising to see them in 14. You know, they went to the finals last year, but even sometimes you go to the finals or you play in the finals and win, it's difficult to replicate that. It's difficult to bring that back around. And one of the reasons it's difficult to replicate that is because now you have a new target on your back. Now teams are coming into your building looking for you. Now teams are coming into your building saying, this is a marquee game for us. Let's beat the Heat.
You're the big kid on the block.
Yeah, and I don't want to knock Jimmy Butler's haircut, but that might have had something to do with it because it's one of the things that they talk about as a franchise. And so my thing is if you're sitting there worried about your hair, what that says is you want to draw attention to yourself for that reason. Okay? The Heat have kept their focus on team. They've kept their whole focus on the whole team operation. No part is greater than the sum of the whole. I'll say that again. Coaches, no part is greater than the sum of the whole. That's the only thing in geometry that I ever learned. But it's really, really critical in coaching. I think after last year's run, Jimmy Butler, he came back with his new hairdo and all that other stuff. I think he might have got outside of himself a little bit here. And that's why they're 10-8 and barely above 500 for a team that played in the finals last year. Again, maybe they're getting a whole different kind of look from people. I don't know. But in the 15th spot, Donovan Mitchell led Cleveland Cavaliers 10-8. They're holding on by a thread in Cleveland, but I didn't see them this high, so I really think that that's a pretty good number for them. 10-8's not bad for Cleveland right now. I really, really didn't see them, having that type of year. But when you have one great player like that and everybody else is willing to form around that, I think you can really do some good stuff in basketball. So I hate to do it, but we're going to just look at who's not here, who might be here later, and who's never going to be here. Okay? We're going to go through this list right now, and we're going to talk about from the bottom up. Worst team in the NBA, we talked about it last week, the Detroit Pistons. They are on an L15, which means they have lost 15 games in a row. They are 2-16. They are absolutely the worst franchise in the NBA right now. Ugh. And that music is about as good as it gets for them. That was apropos, as they say. The Spurs, maybe Popovich shouldn't have stuck around this long. He said he's going to stay here for Wembanyama and guide him through. Well, they've lost 12 games in a row, and they're 3-14. So it might be time to head out to the old Alamo, Pop, and let somebody else take the reins and get off the sidelines and get to retirement. Go have some Cabernet Sauvignon and have some fun with it. But right now, it can't be fun at 3-14. Billy Donovan, get a college job, Billy. Go back and become a college coach again. You're the only guy that won back-to-back NCAA titles, and when you went into the NBA, we lost you. We don't know where you are. Where I'm going to tell everybody you are, because they don't know where you are, is you're in Chicago, and you're in a vaunted franchise with Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and Bill Cartwright and all the great players, Tony Kukoc, that played in Chicago. Right now, you're sucking swamp water in Chicago, and it won't be long before the Chicago Bulls tell Mr. Donovan the same thing that I just told him. Go get a college job. 5-14. Not going to last at a major market arena like that. Not going to happen. All right. So here's the group of people that I hammered in the beginning of the year. They deserve to be hammered. They're nails. They should be hammered. Okay? But the Wizards, they've won 3 games this year. No surprise. But I thought that was their total for the year. So they've exceeded expectations. The Rockets, Imo Udoka, the Celtics coach, who is now with Houston, let go of Boston, now with Houston. I have him as one of my early leaders for Coach of the Year because I had the Rockets not getting off the launch pad at all this year. They have 8 wins, which I thought exceeded their whole year total. So Ime Udoka, I'm going to give you a credit there and say that this guy could be Coach of the Year because Houston's awful. They're terrible. The Utah Jazz, they've won 6 games, and I thought that'd be it for them too. So all of these teams have exceeded my expectations because I didn't think they'd win more games than that on the entire season. That's how bad their franchise is. What I did not extrapolate into my mathematics, because I was never good at math, what I didn't extrapolate into my mathematics is that they would get to play each other a significant amount of times. So what you have here is the catfish feeding on the catfish down at the bottom here. A couple of them have a couple of different wins, but not great. Okay, who's not on our list in the NBA? Golden State Warriors are out of the playoffs right now. They are not in contention. Obviously, Draymond Green has been out for a little bit because of his MMA antics. But I think that team and that franchise is in trouble. They should have never let Jordan Poole go. And I think right now, Klay Thompson, I've said this before, he's shot. Move on. Get somebody else. Start playing some of those younger guys that you have in there, Kuminga and Wiggins and some of these other guys that you've had in this front. You've had a lot of young, good players in there, and now they're not there. Some of them are not there anymore, but you do still have a few of them. Klay Thompson, to me, is shot. The Clippers, the big lineup, the big 4, Westbrook, who I think's coming off the bench a little bit for them right now. And then you have James Harden and Kawhi Leonard and Paul George out of the playoffs right now. That's going to be trouble. And the guy who's going to bear the brunt of that is the coach, because they better get something going out there quick, or they're going to have to pull the trigger quick on that as well. And I thought the Atlanta Hawks would have a good year this year. They would get into playoff contention. Right now they're below the Mendoza line and not doing great. So that's our NBA group. Now we get to move on to the NCAA group, Pete. We're kicking butt here today. We're moving, and we got ice skates on today. We're moving so fast. So, like I said, we are a regional show. We're a community-driven show. When we picked number 1, there were a number of different teams that I could have picked. I picked the UConn Huskies, and I did it because, A, we want more viewers. No question. I'm going to tell you the truth right now. We picked them for a reason, for our own selfish, self-driven reasons. No question about it. But I do want to say the Huskies are 7-0. They have 2 very good wins over Indiana and Texas, and they also just broke the record for non-conference wins in a row of the NCAA. Just set an NCAA record, Danny Hurley and his team, for most non-conference wins in a row, which I believe is 23. They might be at 24 right now. They beat New Hampshire, University of New Hampshire, in order to eclipse the record. That's a great accomplishment for that group. And on top of a national title, I guess what I'm saying here is, as much as I want to, as much as I'm telling you we're shilling, all right, and what we're doing here, they belong in the number 1 spot as well, too, because they're the national champions. They're 7-0. They got 2 very good wins, and nobody's knocked them off yet. If you want us to take them out of the number 1 spot, knock them off. When they get to their league, I think their league is unbelievably tough this year. But for right now, the UConn Huskies, looking at their schedule, they might enter into Big East play undefeated. They may go into Big East play undefeated. That'll keep them in the number 1 spot for me all along. Now, number 2 for us, everybody has them number 1. I watched them. They had 3 monster wins in the weekend. I believe it was in Maui. And Purdue Boilermakers are 7-0. They beat Gonzaga. They beat Marquette. They beat Tennessee. They have some very, very good, what they refer to as quad 1 and quad 2 wins. I just, pulled them into the number 2 spot because they just have, to my eye, they have some weaknesses. The big man, Zach Edey, 7'3", 260, 250 right about now, dropped a little bit of weight. Right now, when he's getting the ball around the basket, it's unbelievable. Nobody can stop him. I think he's the best player in the country right now by far. but I don't think they have I don't think they have the bandmates for him right now. I don't think they have the appropriate bandmates for him right now, and I think that's going to catch them. That's going to be a problematic situation. But everybody had them number one. Probably why I didn't list them number one also, because when everybody does something, I run the other way. And so when everybody was pumping Purdue, I did watch them, and they had 3 really, really good wins. But to my eye, there's some weakness there, and we're going to talk about that maybe a little bit later. Arizona, I picked in the 3 spot. They're 6-0. They have a very, very significant signature win against the Duke Blue Devils at Cameron Indoor Stadium, which might be the toughest place in the country to play. It was a really good win for Arizona. They're 6-0 right now. They also beat Michigan State. So that's why I moved them up there. I think that guy out in Arizona has a really, really great job, and they've really, really held the line there after Lute Olson and the issues with Coach Miller. They seem to have held the line, not really gotten dusted up in any of that NCAA stuff, and they just kept moving along. So Arizona doing very, very well. You look at them and Gonzaga as the 2 teams. UCLA fell off for a little bit, but if you look at the 3 triumvirate of the West Coast out there, you're looking at Gonzaga, UCLA, and Arizona for sure. This is going to surprise some people, but I don't know why it should. Baylor in the 4 spot. They play great defense, like Houston does, like Kelvin Sampson's team does. And they are right now 6-0, and they have wins over Auburn and Florida. And Auburn is a lot better than people think. I got to watch them a few times this year. Once was against my St. Bonaventure Bonnies, and I watched them again last night against some good competition, and they really, really, really look good. And so I think that they're going to be, Auburn's very good. Florida's a very good team. Baylor beat both of those teams. That's why I moved them into the 4 spot. A lot of people have them a lot lower than that. But when I looked at the value of their work, I really thought it was significant. Number 5 is Marquette, the first team with a loss here. First team that's not undefeated. They're 6-1. They lost to Purdue, though. And Purdue's the number 2 team in the country. So I couldn't fault them for that loss. And then I looked at their wins, and they have Illinois, UCLA, and Kansas as wins. So those are 3 very credible wins. So I give them a little bit of a wash with the loss to Purdue, because Purdue's 2 in the country. And if you lose to somebody who's above you, it shouldn't really hurt your standing that much. So I have Marquette at the 6-1. I have them in there. Shaka doing a good job. So lost to Purdue, but they look pretty good to me. Oso, the big man Oso in there is intriguing prospect to look at and watch. And I really enjoyed watching him over the weekend. The next 2 picks are going to make the NCAA people smile, going to make the basketball world smile, because these are 2 of the blue bloods of college basketball. And people think that it has value to see these 2 teams do well. Kansas, 5-1. They have some decent wins. They beat Kentucky. They beat Tennessee. But they got absolutely smoked by Marquette the other night. And I was surprised at the way that team fell apart, at the way they did, because Marquette handled them in every fashion of the game. And the big man, Oso, put it on Hunter Dickinson like I hadn't seen in a while. Dickinson had a good game and everything like that, but the big man was just absolutely dominant in that game, blocking shots, just making people look over their shoulder. I thought he played great. I think they're going to have a good year. But Kansas, 5-1, lost to Marquette, but they have some pretty good wins. Moving up to number 7, which I thought was a little high myself, but I watched them last night, and they absolutely looked great to me. Reed Sheppard is going to be the new name out there of the college basketball world. Get on that early. Buy that stock early. Reed Sheppard from Kentucky. Their only losses to Kansas, but they absolutely throttled what I consider to be a pretty good Miami team. They put it on Miami the other night from start to finish. It wasn't close. Miami couldn't get anything going. And Reed Sheppard absolutely dominated that game. And you're talking about Norshard Ormir, Wooga Poplar. There's some really good players on that Miami team, but this young man absolutely cooked it. So I moved Kentucky up to 7-7 with a 5-1. a 5-1 record. They have some pretty good wins, and their only losses to Kansas. So I think they're doing all right. Let's see how it holds together because they are young, but they're talented. They're very, very talented. Number 8, I have Houston. People are going to say, Rich, Houston's listed in everybody's top 3. They're 7-0. And the reason that I moved them down to 8 is because they have played nobody. They have no signature wins. Everybody they have played have been St. Mary's Sisters of the Poor, Willie Ross School. They just have not put up a whole lot of digits.
Whole lot of cannoli.
That's a whole lot of cupcake. And I'm a little surprised at Kelvin Sampson because his team, although I know he's entering the Big 12 and they're going to run into that really rigorous league schedule, they're not being tested right now. And although they're 7-0, I put them way down here at the 8th spot because I just didn't see it from them on their schedule. We'll watch them. We'll keep a close eye on them. Play great defense, and they're really, really solid, but I want to keep an eye on them as well. They lost a lot. Gonzaga, Mark Few. Few times you're going to see his team outside the top 10. He's been one of the top coaches in college basketball in the last 15 years. He has to be in the top 5 of coaches in that time. Absolutely doing a great job with a relatively small program out there in Washington. Not really where there's elite players, surrounded by them like you have in New York and Philadelphia and L.A., but he's done an absolute great job. I have them 4-1. Their only losses to Purdue, but Purdue throttled them and handled them pretty good. I got Miami number 10, 5-1. I wanted to drop them a little bit lower also because of what happened to them against Kentucky. Kentucky absolutely throttled them. And road games can be tough. That Kentucky arena, Rupp Arena, is one of the best in the country, no question. But, I mean, they got sideswiped by that team the other night. And I don't think Kentucky's all that great. So it was surprising for me to see Miami fall apart like they did there. They're 5-1. Their wins are Georgia and Kansas State, which those are okay wins. They're not great wins. So right now, Jimmy Larinaga and his group are usually hanging out in Boca Raton for a 10 or 12 game stretch, and they'll bounce back, I'm sure. But that loss to Kentucky wasn't a good one. I got North Carolina. People are going to be happy because there ain't nothing finer than North Carolina, especially when they're listed above Duke. And people love that down there. I have them at 11. They have one loss to Villanova, and they got throttled by Villanova. And Villanova has now subsequently lost to Penn and St. Joseph's as their 2 losses. So Villanova got bounced out, but they put it on North Carolina when they played them and have showed some. They're about the most bipolar team in the country right now. Their losses to Penn, their loss to St. Joe's, are Philadelphia Big 5 games, which I can't tell you the last time a Villanova team lost to 2 teams in the Big 5, not just one. But also they play at a high level. When they play in North Carolina, they were great. They were unbelievable, and then go lose to those teams. So that's a bifurcation that I can't quite understand right now. But that's why we moved them way down as well. BYU, the Cougars of BYU, Brigham Young. You don't see this very often, but they're 6-0. They're listed 12th in the country. I got to watch them the other night because in our picks that we had given out, we had gotten to be 6-0. Our first loss was when we picked NC State over BYU. BYU throttled NC State that night, and I watched the game, and they looked pretty good. Although I was upset to lose our streak of 6 straight wins in a row, it was exciting to watch BYU play because they're really, really tough, and they're 6-0, and they have wins over NC State and San Diego State. If this continues, I'd be happy to move them way up the list quickly because they're doing some good stuff out there. Florida Atlantic, 13th. They started the season in the top 5. They were very, very high. Really, really good squad from the Final Four last year. Everybody's excited about Dusty May as a coach. They lost to Bryant. Phil Martelli took the interim tag off there and went out and beat them when they were 10th in the country. I had to drop them. But they came back. They have a win over Texas A&M. We'll get to see them when they arrive in Springfield, obviously. But I had to drop them. That loss to Bryant is just head-scratching. Bryant's a 300-plus RPI team, And how do you lose to them in that game? I really don't know. They have some other good contests that have come out, but here's a team that I was a little surprised at. Texas, I have them down in the 14th spot. They lost to UConn, and they have played absolutely nobody after that time. And so they have a good record. They're 5-1, but UConn dismantled them. I wanted to see more. They almost lost to Louisville in the Garden. They were very, very lucky to escape a Louisville team that played really, really well, but is by no means anywhere outside the top 50 in college RPI rating. So this Texas team, I'm not exactly sure what's going on out there, but they've had some. It's a football school, and as much success as they've had in basketball, it doesn't always matriculate. It doesn't always resonate. So number 15, this is a surprise team. I might have moved them up even a little higher, is Colorado State. They're 6-0. They beat Creighton. They had a very, very good signature win over Creighton, and they beat Boston College as well. Two pretty good wins, a Big East team and ACC team, although BC is generally, the catfish of the ACC, one of the worst teams in the league historically. But Colorado State is 6-0. 16 is Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain. And Porter Moser has gotten his team calibrated and ready to go. He had the great success at Loyola Chicago with Sister Jean and the great run they had to the Final Four. Well, that, transpired into him getting the Oklahoma job. And for a little bit of time, they haven't been able to gather their wind and really make a run. Right now, they're 6-0. They have wins over USC and Iowa. Two very good quality wins, so I'm interested to watch that team a little bit and move them up freely if all of that continues. Moser's a really good offensive coach, does a really good job with his 4-out offense, and so I think that, sometimes it'll take a little bit of time to get the personnel recruited that fits your system, and I think that might have been some of the issue at Oklahoma here, but right now they seem to be cooking with gasoline. And when he gets a team running, we saw what happened with Illinois Chicago. They didn't have the greatest talent in the world, but when he got that team running and playing, they really, really made a run into the Final Four and did some really good stuff there. So keep an eye on that team. Nebraska, I got them. Nobody wants to put this team in the top 25. I don't know why. They're 7-0. They beat Oregon State. They haven't played anybody else, but they did beat a pretty good team in Oregon State. Not great team, but they're 7-0. And they haven't been 7-0 in a really, really long time in men's basketball. It's another football job, and that's a very, very difficult job in basketball, the Nebraska job. I was lucky to play in their tournament one time with Danny Nee was the head coach. We went out there. We were in their tournament. What a first-class operation. The facilities that they have for both football and basketball are ridiculous. I never had a steak as good as I had when I was out there in Nebraska, but it's just not a basketball school because there's no talent around there. You can go miles and miles and miles without finding a Division I player. So it's a difficult job, and for them to be 7-0 right now, I said, let's give them a look. Auburn at 5-1, I have them listed at 18. They're better than that. Right now, I think that it's going to take a little bit of time, but they had a very small capsule size. They lost to Baylor. That's not bad because I have Baylor listed in the 4 spot, but that's one of the reasons I have Baylor listed in the 4 spot is because they beat Auburn, and I think Auburn's very good. Johnny Broome, the good big man they have, I think they're okay. They beat Notre Dame. They beat Virginia Tech. Not great wins there, but they're starting to look pretty good to me. And Bruce Pearl is obviously – he's an exciting coach, gets after it on the sideline. So his teams always play with a lot of passion and enthusiasm. They're a little crazy at times, but they play with a lot of heart and a lot of enthusiasm. So I have them at 18. 19, I have Creighton. I was a little bit high on them earlier in the year. I think they'll do fine in the Big East, but they just had a head scratcher, of a loss that I looked at and I said, wow, I thought they would take care of Colorado State, and they don't have very many good signature wins outside of that. So I was a little bit disappointed in them. And when they get to the Big East, you better pack a lunch because the Big East is loaded this year. You have UConn, you have Xavier, you have Creighton, you have some very, very good teams at the top of the Big East. Villanova will be a hard out for anybody. Providence is 6-1, and we're going to mention them in a second. Number 20, San Diego State, 6-1. They lost to BYU. That was a really good win for BYU. But they have some good wins. They beat St. Mary's, which is a great win. They beat Washington and they beat Cal. So I put them in there. I don't know why people are so down on them. I think I probably moved them a little bit higher too. They were in the Final Four last year. 6-1 right now. Bad loss to BYU, but that shouldn't knock them out of the top 20. 21, I have Providence, the Friars. We're going to really, really keep an eye on this team. New coach, Kim English from George Mason. Doing pretty good though. They've had some good success. They beat Wisconsin. They beat Georgia, but they did lose to Kansas State. So I think Providence is okay right now. I have them in the top 25. I think when they get into their league, they'll probably be lucky to finish 500 in that league. So we'll have to keep an eye on them. Cincinnati in the number 22 spot. Been a while since we could say this about Cincinnati, but they are 6-0, and they have a good signature win over Georgia Tech. I think that's a good reason to put them in, but they're undefeated. But I put them at 22 because they haven't played anybody else. And Georgia Tech isn't exactly the top of the ACC. Georgia Tech is going to struggle with Stoudemire this year. They're going to have to rebuild. They're going to have to recalibrate. But right now they're a program that's kind of fallen and has trouble getting up. So we go to 23, Ohio State. They're 6-1. They lost to Texas A&M, but they beat Alabama. So they have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but it is Ohio State. They're 6-1. They lost Sensabaugh. They lost some players last year that are pretty good. But I think that's the kind of job where you can just recalibrate and reload based on their NIL situation, based on their portal strength. But in the 23 spot, Ohio State, they probably think that's terrible. They probably think that's terrible. So in the 24 and 25 spot, I really wanted to give a shout out to both of these two teams. There was a lot of bumping and grinding here of teams we could have put in here. But at 7-0, James Madison, I'm putting them in. Harrisburg, Virginia, small school down there, playing a small conference. They're 7-0 right now. Their football team is kicking it off the charts, and their basketball team is hot as well. They beat Michigan State. That's a huge, huge upset, and they took over a $100,000 guarantee from that game. So right there, I'm going to put them into the 24 spot, James Madison University. And now at the 25th spot, a lot of people might look at this and say, well, their schedule, wasn't great. I put the Princeton Tigers in here at 6-0 after their great run last year, went deep into the NCAA tournament, and then they wound up beating Rutgers on the first game of the year this year. So I'm very high on Princeton. I love their coach. I think they're doing great stuff. And one of the things you'll find out as a coach, when you have really smart players, you can do some really good stuff with them. And at Princeton right now, they got really smart players. They lost one of their players to the NBA draft last year, which doesn't happen for Princeton all that often.
Sure.
And they have not missed a step. Have not missed a step. How much time we got left, Pete?
4 minutes.
4 minutes. Must have started right on the get here.
We did.
What I usually do, and I didn't do today, I usually try and mark down the time that we start in my paper here so I can look at it. But for some reason today I got all excited and pumped up and I didn't write it down. So here's who's out of our top 25. And we're going to talk about why they're out, because they're not out of anybody else's top 25. And it's a problem, because if they have a reputation and they have this kind of vaunted historical perspective, that it takes a lot less to get them out of the top 25 than it would somebody else. For example, I have James Madison in the top 25. If they lose a game to somebody who's a mid-level conference thing, we're going to have to take them out. Same thing with Princeton. If they lose to Penn, we'll probably have to take them out of the 25 because your schedule is not as strong as those other people. But we took Duke out. Okay, they have 2 losses right now. Everybody is trying their best to validate Duke and to hold on to Duke because it's so important to the landscape of college basketball. Something about the blue. Kentucky blue, Kansas blue, Duke blue. They need the blue in there. Carolina with the light blue. They need the blue in there for some reason. But I took them out because I watched them last night, and Arkansas absolutely dismantled Duke. They dismantled them. They had Arizona in on their home floor, had a chance for a signature win, and they blew both of those games. I'm telling you now that there's something going on there that doesn't meet the eye. There's something going on there with the chemistry of this team. There's something going on there that doesn't absolutely meet the eye. And all of the people down in Durham are going to know exactly what I'm talking about when I say this. Get John Shire a Pete Gaudette. Get John Shire a Pete Gaudette. I'm going to leave it at that. People down in North Carolina are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. I'll give you a brief understanding of what I'm talking about. Mike Krzyzewski had a guy on his right hand the entire time he was at Duke. For a very, very little bit of time at the end, he didn't have him. The gentleman's name was Pete Gaudette. He handled all of the X's and O's. He handled all of the basketball stuff. He was an outstanding basketball coach, and he was an outstanding number 2 to Mike Krzyzewski. You better find an outstanding number 2 to sit next to this guy right now. I'm putting the word out in Durham. Go get Pete Gaudette Jr. Okay, Michigan State, out. I think they're terrible. Everybody talking about them. Tom Izzo, his year is March and everything like that. His team looks awful right now. He looks out of it a little bit on the sidelines. Looks like he's, having some difficulty with some of the new players and the nuances and the nouveau approach to the game. I think that can happen, and I think it's real. Can they recalibrate? Can they get it together? They have almost everybody back from a team that did very, very well last year, but we bounced them. We bounced them out of our top 25 because they don't belong in there. Tennessee took them out. They have 3 credible losses against really, really good teams, but you didn't beat any of them. You had 3 opportunities to get signature wins. Had you won one of those games, I might have kept you in the top 25. But right now, you got too many losses, and one of them to North Carolina wasn't great. Villanova, everybody down there is excited about Kyle Neptune and everything. Again, he was at Fordham for 1 year. Villanova wanted him bad, just like they wanted Jay Wright when they had Steve Lapis, so they jumped the trigger, went and pulled it, and said, okay, here we go. It was a mistake because there were 250 resumes in the country better than Kyle Neptune's. And I say that about North Carolina. I say that about Duke. I say that about, unless the guy's been on the bench for 15, 20 plus years and really worked in some significant scenarios, you can't turn that job over to him. We've said that a number of times. Okay, who's rising? I like Memphis. I watched them over the weekend. They're rising. I like them. Keep an eye on Penny Hardaway's team. Next week, we're going to come back with a little bit of our coaching hot seat. Who you think is early on is going to be on a coaching hot seat, and we're going to take a look at that. There's a couple of coaches right now that stand out where they should be renting, not buying, and probably looking at getting a proper size U-Haul to get all their stuff out of there because it ain't going to last much longer. Pete, we're in the zone. We'll see you next week. Fastest hour in college basketball right here.